around for the last 5 minutes, you'd be laughing your butts off. Hello again. Welcome to Addiction Got a Minute. It is January 11th, 2019, and I'm joined by my esteemed partner. I kind of tripped up on the phrase. I'm not that quick. Michael Blanchard. Hey, Mike, how are you? I'm doing good.
And I think we're filming this like with one of my pictures behind us.
I know.
Are we doing that?
The backstroke.
All right, cool. No, I enjoy that. Yeah, I mean, photography's been a big part of my getting out of the hole, so I'd always like to share that, you know? So.
Yes, and for those of you that have not seen Michael's work, you're going to start seeing it because it is really good, and it's appropriate for this portion of the program where we're talking about think globally, act locally. Well, this is the act locally portion of the process that we're trying to instigate here. The idea, folks, is to share best practices with everybody. Best practices, a business term for literally the things that work, and sharing with everybody what's working. And we will be doing something really very interesting today. We're going to add a second portion to the program. Michael and I will be doing this. We're going to be talking about interventions and the different styles. But then the second half of the program will be a Skype interview with Patti Pike, my partner on the audio cast, Addiction Got a Minute. And we're joined by a doctor who is incredibly well versed in this, and we'll speak more about that. But it'd be great to have your photos in the back, which will represent our island life, and I look forward to you sharing your feelings about those. Can I tell
one quick story?
No, we don't have enough time.
So and I don't know, people would probably be scared to death if we put some of these other photos up there, but I have a photograph. So there was I tried to do a program around the island, and I actually went to the West Chop Club, and I love those people. I did a sermon, which is almost, oh my God. But I did a community talk where I wanted to show the power of photography and healing. And so I have a picture, it's a story of a 22-year-old girl who was unable to, we're talking about intervention, could not talk in group settings or couldn't do anything to that extent. And she was in therapy for 6 months. And so she was with her therapist one day, and instead of listening to the therapist, which is a surprise, that she was playing with her iPhone. And so the therapist had just read an article about the power of imagery in treatment. So he looked at her instead of yelling at her for the 100th time. She said, if you're so can you take pictures with that thing? And she said, of course I can take pictures. She says, well, listen, since you're not going to talk to me, can you go out and take some photographs over the next 2 weeks of what your life, the good and the bad, the ugly, whatever. Take pictures that if I asked you to do a documentary of your life in photo, could you do that for me? And it broke her out. She said sure, and so she took off. She came back, and so what I wanted to display on the green screen, but I guess it would be overly dramatic, but the 5 pictures she came back with at the end of the week were a knife, tree bark, toilet, a closed Bible, and an open Bible. This is a true story. And so when she sat with the counselor and he said, wow, why this? And then she started talking. She said, the knife is for my backstabbing friends who I can't trust anymore. And then she said, the tree bark is because I cut myself so I can feel something. And then she said, the toilet's there because that's where I vomit so that I can stay thin. And then the closed Bible was her hatred of God. And then the open Bible was her hope that she could believe in anything or anybody. And wow. The girl started crying at that moment. And so that counselor had an entry point that he never had before because she opened up about the photos. Now, when I was at the West Chop Club and I told this story, and people were some were crying in the audience and some were like stunned. And at the end, they clapped, and then I went outside, and I remember a guy came up to me, and he put his arm around me, and he looked this way, and he looked this way, and he said, we don't talk about those things here. And then he looked again, and he said, but we probably should. But it's a silent thing that people still aren't willing to talk about. And when you start talking about interventions, is the family can't even talk about the subject. If it's that, taboo that I can't even think about having anybody know that somebody in my family is has an addiction issue. Wow, you know, and so there's so many dynamics, and you're an interventionist, and I'm just like somebody who needed an intervention. But I respect, and I think it's important people to know the difference between what you get paid to do because of your skills, and you come in and you help a family that's really locked in and with no forward movement, and how they can break through that, you know. So I have great respect for that.
Well, it's well said, and you are the living embodiment of the other side. What's the results? Once we stop somebody from continuing the self-destruction, once we infuse hope, inspiration, motivation, what can happen? And that's the big reason why Michael's here is that because what he's made of. By the way, Dr. Howard Kornfeld will be our guest later in the second half. Michael brought up the idea of what are interventions and how people get scared. We were joking earlier how I said, somebody will drink, a fifth, go out at 3 in the morning at 20 below with no shirt in the woods, walking across the streets, almost getting hit by cars and buses. Yet when you talk to them about wanting to get help, they're scared to death.
I only did that once. All right, I'm sorry. I don't like to take my shirt off.
But how many people have we heard? They put themselves into horrifically
incredible stories of resilience. When I was in a rehab facility, somebody that we were in for 3 months, and it's 6 miles between the location where the rehab actually takes place and the apartments where we lived. And somebody got drunk one night and decided he was going to walk all the way to the facility in the middle of the night and walk in 6 miles. Superhuman feats of, and was eventually caught up with and brought back in again. But there's no limit when you're totally drunk and you're wandering aimlessly, that's for sure.
And unfortunately, we have here, even here on Martha's Vineyard, there have been people who have done that, and it's been the last we've ever been able to know about them. So, these things are horrible. And the challenge of how do you inspire somebody to motivate? And this is what I'm asking the community to think about: the value of helping somebody go from the tar pit of their life, and the benefits of 2 years later, after all the hard work's been done, and they're starting to live a new, healthy, sane life. Was it worth it? And my answer is hell yeah. Versus the probability that things aren't going to end well. So there have been a couple of folks who I've helped who they're still in long-term treatment. There's a lot of changes which need to take place. And the families are at different stages of accepting or being afraid of the stages of these healings. Because a lot of times it's just scary because they're away and they're involved in a new program, and they aren't at all educated about what goes on. So here's the big question. How do I help the community understand that what I'm doing is soft and gentle and loving and inviting and supportive? Not at all the thing which when you say intervention, most folks think of the confrontational style of the television show. And the television show, the folks who do that, and you guys are phenomenal at what you do, incredibly well-versed, well-educated, well-skilled, and the results, about 85% of folks who go through the confrontational style are successful. And I got some quotes from various publications, and maybe I'll be able to quote that one directly. But you can go to my website for more details on this. But direct interventions and indirect interventions are the basic two sides. The direct interventions are, you have the confrontation style that we talked about. But then there's forcible interventions, which is when somebody is made to go against their will. Crisis interventions, by the determination, by the name itself, the definition, is during the emergent critical phase of the life-risking event, the crisis. This is what folks are familiar with when they come to the ER. This is where, for years, the folks at Community Services who provide emergency services, continue to do this that I did for so long. It's a very different environment because they're brought to the emergency department because they've either made a threat to harm themselves or they have put others in a position which is so dire that there was imminent end of life risk. So that's when the crisis intervention is taking place. The crisis intervention is to approach the urgent critical need of the moment, calm the waters, make peace in the valley, and allow for communication to start.
And a lot of times that's where it ends. We both worked with people. So I was working with a kid a couple weeks ago that was sectioned. And sectioning is, again, some sort of around what you're saying, is that the parents or somebody who's there say, look, imminent danger to himself or others or herself, and I'm putting you in. It allows for that moment. You're right. In fact, what you just said clicked with me, is that when that person gets sectioned, they're usually probably pretty angry. They're going to resist. The individual I spoke with said there was no way I was going to listen to anybody, and I couldn't wait to get out of there because you've set it up as a forcible detention against your will, and if you still haven't accepted your disease and that your demise is imminent, you're going to fight it. But there is a moment of sobriety, right, because you're stuck inside, and there's a moment of communication and maybe a moment of clarity. That's more than you had 10 minutes ago when you were about to die or hurt somebody else. But I think if you looked at the percentage of overall successes from sectioning, it's going to be like really low because that person probably doesn't buy into the whole process. Versus when I look at Intervention, the TV show, I see that instead of, hey, we're going to force you in, I'm going to try to show you all of the things that are happening that you're blocking out, the family effects, you're bringing more to bear, more of a gentle approach than even if it's confrontational, it's still more communicative or gentle than it is to say I'm sectioning you and have a police officer take you off to where you're going. It's just that the chances of success seem to be so small.
But then there's a chance.
But there's a chance that you didn't have before. If that person's going to die, then boy, take it, right?
And that's literally what I say to folks.
Yeah.
They are here, and because they're here, it's a good day. Today is the best day of their lives because they're surrounded by support. They're surrounded by encouragement and guidance. We've got the tools to be able to get motivation going. It doesn't mean we're going to be successful because those outcomes come after all these pieces are put together. But at least you're here, and that's the start. Now, what I've been called on to do, outside of any of that, has been with planning in advance. The family systemic style of intervention and the love first style of intervention, of which I'm trained, very, very similar. The nuances aren't even important enough to get into at this point, except to say, what I do is bring the team together. Family members, mom, dad, grandpa, brother, sister, uncle, friend, employer, who are all concerned about the individual, and they team up and create a plan of action with strategic identified responsibilities. And if anyone is interested, contact me and I'll share much more detail. But people are given different responsibilities during the performance of the intervention. I liken myself as an orchestra leader. I sit back, at that point, I don't do anything. Basically, I'll direct people to talk. You, and now you, and now you. And what they say, letters are prepared, expressing their concern, the value of their engagement, elements of proof of the destruction of the addiction, and restating the love. Now the letters go back and forth because I'll help cull out any spiteful, angry, hurtful pieces so that in spite of the fact that you may still have resentment of these things, which is very understandable, in the engagement with the person at that time, you're going to shower them with constructive, emotionally supportive, sincere, authentic support and guidance. So each person has their piece, and they say it, and people are placed in strategic places. Now, this is critical. Where they sit with and around the loved one is really important. Folks who tend to be saboteurs or want to be instigators will be sat back a little bit out of the direct line of sight. So they're not apt to inspire angst. And the ones that are really loving and supportive will be the ones in really direct and close. And always with love and respect, always. So there's two different styles of it which allow folks to either have the loved one or the person who's we're concerned about is part of the planning. And I'm working with somebody with that right now. We talk about what their recovery can look like, what type of assistance they're looking for. Hey, listen, if you're a doctor, your world is very different than if you're a sheetrocker. It's very different if you're into motorcycles. It's very different if you're into knitting. So a 70-year-old mother of 4 will want a different environment than a 26-year-old jockey. Yeah. So we talk about that. And with their involvement, we work at taking care of the utilities and the financial responsibilities, feeding the fish, the dogs, getting work leave, getting all those pieces taken care of, so that when we do sit with the family, and the family will still be there, even though they are very much part of it, the family is now encouraging and supporting and enhancing the belief that the outcome's going to be well worth it. And this isn't scary at all. Quite to the opposite. Once you finally do get to the kind of places where I have been getting folks help, they're nice, they're supportive, and there are, what's it called when you graduate and then you come back for parties every now and then?
Your alumni? Or
alumni
your
parties.
Yeah.
Really? And they do it by Skype if you can't be there. But these are exciting, believe it or not, enjoyable days. The detox that we talk about is always uncomfortable. You're detoxing, you're getting a chemical out of your system. That's not what I'm talking about. Because after detox, we're talking about the different forms of treatment. And folks, there are these stories about how the 28-day program was created. I don't know if this is true, but I was led to believe that it was at an insurance conference where somebody stood up, and when they were at the podium, somebody said, "How long do you think coverage should last?" And he just happened to think and said 28 days. Now, please, if anybody knows the literal truth, Howie@howiemarlin.com. I really want to know. But the point being, longer treatment to create a new sanity, a new view of the world is really important. That's why it needs to be no shorter than 3 months. At the very least, 9.
Well,
at the most.
I did 3.
I'd like a year.
Yeah, a month is, I did a month and failed. 3 months, because there's different phases of your recovery. The first 30 days, I'm off alcohol. Oh my God, I'm actually functioning without the alcohol in my system. You're doing basic repair work. You're trying to understand your disease, the people you hurt, whatever. The second month, you're starting to build and getting into some, because recovery is more than just stopping drinking. You have wreckage in your life. You have issues. I had to write letters to my father, and I mean, hypothetical, I didn't send them to him, but I had to do a lot of stuff, a lot of soul work in the second month, once I had gotten past some of the basic repair. And then the third month was the most critical, well, I shouldn't say the most critical, but a critical piece was when we had to do service work. So once we were 60 days in.
What is service work?
So service work is like, I had to go, they said, okay, Mike, you've made it through the first 2 months, and now you need to, the theory is you need to learn to come outside yourself. As an alcoholic or an addict, you're self-centered. You're thinking about your pain. You're all inside yourself. You learn to give in the third month. You learn to come out. So if you were, for example, they forced me to get in a van with a worker at the rehab and drive to Hartsfield Airport in Atlanta and meet new patients coming in. And when I saw a physician and his mother coming up the steps, totally bleached white in fear and not being able to talk, I was immediately taken out of my self-centeredness, and I was put in a place where I had to comfort and try to guide those two people to success. And so I spoke to the mother and said, I'm going to stand right by him. Don't worry, Mom, you know, I'm going to be with your son. I'm not going to let him go down. And then I took ownership of helping that person. And when I was leaving on my graduation day, a couple weeks later, I was standing in front of the group because it was my graduation, and I said thank you to everybody. And that kid, a physician, stood up in the back of the room and said, what you did for me was the most important thing that saved my life here. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, you stood by me in that ride in the van, and then when we came back, you helped guide me. He says, you don't know how much that instant of caring meant for me to be able to survive here and to make it. And I said, holy crap, just showing some concern. And suddenly now me as an addict and an alcoholic, I actually feel like I'm worth something, right? And so then you leave the facility after 3 months, and you've managed without alcohol. You've learned a little bit about what your issues are, that your life's issues, and then you also learn that you could give back to others and that you're worth something. So the 28 days, I don't know how you compress all that in, you know? So I'm a big fan of that, but insurance companies, unfortunately, are not. They're more 21 or 28 days, you know, and just hope for the best when you get back out. So
I can speak for my brethren in the industry. It's ludicrous, simply ludicrous. But your insight, what you just shared, was the reason why you're here. The view of it from the inside is incredibly valuable, and thank you very much for sharing that.
Yeah, it's very important to be able to have some self-esteem. And I'm writing a book, and the reason that one came off my head, because I just wrote that, I have a photograph. I go out and I sit and I think, wow, I remember that day when, you know, when he got up and said, you know, because what happened is when he couldn't even speak, and he was being put into a room with 3 other physicians who were like the macho commercial. And I said, he's going to get ground up and spit out. This poor guy can't even speak. So I went to the housing people and I said, you got to help me. And I broke all the rules because you're not supposed to interfere with any of this stuff. And I said, if you put him in that room, he is not going to make it because he can't even talk. And so they put him in a room with some really kind, empathetic men. And he found out about it behind the scenes about 3 weeks later, that I had gone through the trouble of trying to get him into a different room. And I was just thinking out of gut reaction, and that's what made him say that you were so helpful for me. And then that put me on a path where I said, you know what, I want to help people when I get out of here. I want to be a counselor. I want to be a therapist. This is such an amazing feeling to know that you had an impact on somebody's life. And that really drove me to success. And I don't know how it would have been a lot harder to discover that if I didn't have that structured opportunity to do it. Because there's smart people in that rehab. This wasn't just random that they set it up this way. They're smart.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because we will take another time to talk about the disparity in treatment facilities. There are incredibly good ones, and there are ones which they're old school. They were created on a financial model which, let's just say, don't tend to be as client-centric as they could. You should know that my experience, I worked at Bournewood Hospital. And I was part of the treatment team. So I was part of the folks that you're talking about who have a very methodical, clinical processes, options to choose for different individuals. So one of the reasons why it can work so well is that those of us who have been studying how people heal have multiple cards in their hands. So as we meet different individuals with different personality types and styles of engagement, we can hopefully match that. And I say hope because you can get the most good-hearted people, the most well-prepared facility, the most good-intended staff and support staff, and things just don't work out. But on the other hand, you can have an awkward facility with people that don't have that much experience, who it's in an awkward place in town, but your state of mind is spot on. You can walk in ready. And if you walk in ready, whatever the treatment program is will help, because it's just facilitating what you want. And that's my intentions. When I come to help you, pull you out of that tar pit, I want you inspired so you walk, get up and go. I don't do it. I actually just sort of sweep a little bit of, light snow out of the way and go, there you go.
But it's so important because, like, you don't know, and I'm not sure if we're running out, I guess we're running out of time. When you were telling the story about performing an intervention, lining up the family, having all of the, you're trying to leverage that emotion, I was actually having a gut level reaction listening to you. And the reaction was, I immediately was transported back to the day that I was going down. I had gotten my 3rd DUI in 3 months, and I didn't know what I was how I could get out of it. There is such a fear level in your gut when you're at that end, and that's where you just put me.
Thanks for bringing it.
I was at the end, and even though I was at the end, I was so afraid of what the next step might bring that I was numb. And that's what's so important to me about an intervention is how can you overcome. It's like even as you were saying it, my brain went, if they were all standing there in the room, my parents and everybody's trying to get me to go, I went into an immediate gut flight. I'm running. You're not, and that's so weird. My gut says, I'm out of here. You people, I know you love me, but I'm gone. Get away from me, I'm gone. Why is that?
What part is speaking? What part of you?
The part of speaking is that addiction is saying, holy, you can't survive without me being in your system. They're nice people, they're really cool, but you can't survive without me. I am scared to death I can't even imagine it. So that's why I think interventions or anything is hard to get somebody, but that gives you the best chance because you've got a supportive group that's there. But if I'm still having that reaction right now, sitting here, then you can tell how scary it can be for an addict or an alcoholic to even contemplate saying yes. And it's, so you got to do it well, but anyway.
You got to do it well. I will tell you that many times, if you do some homework, the family can do really good work, and a lot of times, if your loved one kind of recognizes it's time, you can inspire them to take action. There are plenty of times where a little homework goes a long way. Some great YouTube videos on different types of interventions. If you are interested in helping a loved one yourself, I'd be happy to give you guidance and some direction, things to read, and some support material. And yeah, it's definitely worth doing. If somebody has a co-occurring issue, a mental health issue, if the severity is life-threatening to the point where there's imminent demise if they continue, it's probably best you call in a professional who has options. They have options. They've been through enough of them so that they've got some alternative ways of dealing with it. And to support Arthur Westinghouse from down in who I interviewed a few weeks ago in Nashville, Arthur, when he walks into an intervention, he turned to me and goes, first thing that happens, throughout the book, everything you knew, you have to pull new stuff. And you'll pick some Arise, some Johnson, some support, some love first. So the truth is, an eclectic world of resources is my philosophy. The truth is, I much prefer love first. I much prefer having the loved one informed, so the visceral reaction that you just spoke of isn't there because they're a team member, a team leader. Yeah. So that would be the preferable way to go. So there's a lot more discussion. By the way, we will be returned shortly with part of that discussion with Patti Pike, my partner out in British Columbia and San Francisco, a certified interventionist who I've been working with for the audio podcast and who's now coming aboard as part of this news program. I hope you have patience with us as we grow. We're growing and changing. There'll be new things. Please continue to give me your support, feedback, and not necessarily just saying great job, and although always a pat on the back's very nice, thank you very much. But it's much more important.
Tell him it's lousy, tell me great job.
It's really important to get your feedback, so thank you in advance for those who have chimed in, and quite a few you have, And if you like this on Facebook or on YouTube, do, and please share. It's really important. Share with professionals. Share with your doctors, therapists, other people you're involved with, schools, teachers, anybody that's involved with your loved one. Have this show at their fingertips. My information is all at decisionscounselingservices.com, otherwise known as howiemarlin.com, which is probably easier to reach me. How can people reach you?
mblanche601@mac.com is my email, and 617-448-3934.
By the way, that's, this will be going internationally.
That's your phone number. No, that's my phone. Please feel free to reach out. I think the whole world knows the phone number anyway, so just feel free.
Addressing intervention comes in many forms. One of them is the employment of an interventionist and medical assistants. Tonight, we're going to introduce the second half of our show called The Interventionists. Patricia Pike, who's an interventionist on the West Coast, is my co-host. And today we introduce Dr. Howard Kornfeld. Welcome to the second half of Addiction Got a Minute. And today, this is kind of groundbreaking. What we're doing is we are doing live Skype with Patti Pike, my co-host, from the program that we normally do an audio cast. And so hi, Patricia.
Good morning, Howie.
Good morning. Where in the world are you today?
I'm in San Francisco in Marin County today.
Wonderful. And
home sweet home, which is nice.
I never know where she is because she's often in British Columbia. And we're joined by Dr. Howard Kornfeld. Good morning.
Good morning.
Where in the world are you?
I am in Mill Valley, California, which is in Marin County also.
Just want you guys to know you got my family covered. My two brothers are up in the Bay Area. My sister is down in LA. All right, we represent. Well, Thank you again. And today, I want to just talk about the clinical role that you have played in the act of getting people motivated and into treatment. So, Patti, Howard is your connection. Why don't you lead?
Yeah, I know I'll do my best here, Howie. I'm just really excited to have Dr. Kornfeld on this morning. I call him Dr. K. And anyway, I'm just really excited to have him on, and he's been a pillar in the community for many, many years, and he has many talents and, works with, I believe, a lot of a diverse population in terms of some of the folks that may be resistant to formal inpatient treatment. And he does a lot of work in the community, which I relate to, because I started off in Vancouver, British Columbia, working a lot alongside with doctors and addiction doctors and research doctors, and worked in the harm reduction field. So I really relate to the whole kind of medical field as well, and really, support Dr. Kornfeld. So anyway, I would like to introduce him this morning. And, I know that we're talking mostly about best practices, and and anything that Dr. Kornfeld can add to our listeners. Our goal, obviously, as Howie has talked about on the audio podcast, is that we really want to target the professional community, but as well, folks that are out there, families and folks that are suffering with addiction and mental health and trauma, and hopefully we can bring some good information to the community. So here you go, Dr. Kornfeld.
Thank you. Well, in the field of addiction medicine, one of the big topics, of course, is how to deal with the opiate use disorder situation and the overdose danger that's lurking on the streets. And that also intersects with chronic pain. There's a lot of people who are using opiates are not only suffering an addictive disorder, but they have medical illnesses that are driving this also. And chronic pain is a very, very often intractable condition that is actually made worse by unfortunately, the practices of many physicians who haven't learned, how to use medications properly in that realm. But it's also now being driven by the street availability of not only pills, but heroin. And much of this is contaminated now with even more dangerous substances. So we're in the midst of this epidemic. So I was lucky back in the 1990s to have learned about buprenorphine. A lot of people call it Suboxone, but that's technically a brand name of a particular type, but the actual medicine is buprenorphine. And so I've devoted a certain part of my professional and academic and teaching activities to learning and understanding and teaching about buprenorphine.
Well, that's critically important. Here on the East Coast, where I live in Martha's Vineyard, the fentanyl issue is through the roof. Medicated assisted treatment is becoming much more popular and better understood. Subutex, Suboxone, buprenorphine, the same product. What is wonderful is that people are now starting to understand if you have cancer and you're given something to help treat that disease, you're in the healing process with the use of that medication. If you are addicted and you're using buprenorphine, you're in the healing process of addiction. And so my philosophy has been MAT, or medication-assisted treatment, is a critical component too, incredibly valuable, and not at all the angst creating, oh, you're doing another drug, you're not sober. So that's an interesting debate that's been going on around here and nationally. What are your feelings about it? I know what they are, but I'd like to hear you say it directly, Doctor.
Yeah, sure. Well, every now and then science and humanity gets lucky, and invents something that's useful. We have so many things that are dangerous, including nuclear weapons and
I'm sure this stuff was created very much by mistake.
But back in the 1960s, some folks that were trying to figure out, could we modify the morphine molecule to make it safer, to create something that would work for pain but wouldn't be so dangerous? And really, they struck it lucky, but it was in the 1960s, so it's a 50-year-old drug. And it's not perfect. I call it, maybe they called it the Holy Grail, finding the Holy Grail of pharmacology. I call it like 80% Holy Grail. The only problem is that, the issue is nothing else is close to it. Even the things that have been invented more recently with, a profit motive, trying to come up with a new molecule, we're probably decades away from the next buprenorphine, even with all of our modern, technology. So they struck it rich, so to speak. It does satisfy craving and withdrawal. For people who are already exposed to opiates, it doesn't cause a euphoric kick, so to speak. Now, if high school students, adolescents are picking up buprenorphine on the street and using, they'll get high, they'll get screwed up, and maybe some of them will get in trouble. But once people are already on opiates, if they're exposed to buprenorphine, usually they just say, well, it helps. It took away the craving. That dose was too high. I didn't need that dose. And it doesn't have the same vicious cycle of the regular opiates, like morphine, heroin, hydrocodone, oxycodone, et cetera.
So what you're saying, it breaks the cycle of the magnet back to the detrimental lifestyle and the detrimental health components. What this does is allows you to work, enjoy your life, enjoy your family. It allows you to start to live a life of sanity, not going back to the street, not going back to the same tar pit of the environment. You can manage your triggers, you can manage your environment, and put time between the last time you did the addictive medication, the addictive drug, and today. and time is the answer. How long, doctor, do you, in your humble experience, how long do you feel people should be engaged with buprenorphine?
Sure. Buprenorphine, yeah. Well, some people could undergo a very short detox and be okay. These would be people who have a very short exposure, to opiates. But very rarely do we get those people. The people with very short exposures are not yet usually ready for treatment. It's usually the ones that months and months of exposure to the opiates have occurred, if not years. And at that point, the opioid receptor system is altered. Some people make a little joke and they say, once a pickle, no longer a cucumber. You know what I mean?
Yes.
The opiates have modified the neural circuits. It's not that the person is diseased or has a broken brain or anything like that, but they're not going to return to normal state for some time. And also, usually by the time that happens, a person's psychosocial life has deteriorated. So there's a lot of wreckage in their life. So they need to get those neural circuits calm, and then they need to get their life together, and they need to learn a new way of being. And all of that takes time. Sometimes it could be a month, sometimes it could be 3 months, sometimes it could be 3 years. We can't force a person to recover. And the problem is if you force the tapering off the buprenorphine too soon, you put that people at risk of hitting the streets again, of having an intractable depression, or getting cross-addicted to alcohol or some other substance.
I'm going to tell you, us Howards need to stick together.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you that my philosophy is all about putting time between the drug and your new life, to live a new life of sanity, to re-engineer the systems, to let the brain heal, to let the brain rewire. And you've actually spoken about literally just that. I'm very grateful that you have this insight, and I truly appreciate the fact that you're sharing this with us. Let me ask you this. Do you find different people of different social stratus to either be more cooperative or more understanding? Now, again, I think I know the answer to this question, but I'd like your feelings on it. If you're working down in the LA, Hollywood area, you have people who are, let's just say, exceedingly accomplished in certain areas. Are there other issues to be concerned with? Patti, take over if you want.
Yeah, no, I was just also thinking about the same thing. I mean, you think about like some of the folks that come in that have been long-term heroin, opiate users that have been able to just completely just get to that point in their life that they don't want to use anymore. And then you've got the folks that, that have this, this cycle, of relapse, or, their life is completely out of control, but they can't stop using drugs. I mean, those are the kind of folks that I used to work with in Vancouver, many years ago, in early 1991, actually, 93 is when I started. And I mean, I would see that cycle, and it was always kind of mind-boggling to me, even though I kind of watched the process for many people, as they went through it. But it was very clear to me back then, and I was thinking about harm reduction, because harm reduction back then was not that popular. It was very abstinent model focused, and a lot of people were, had HIV and AIDS, and a lot of folks were dying, and harm reduction kind of came to the surface, and it really helped save a lot of people's lives. And it also kind of really gave that bridge for folks that were really enmeshed with heroin addiction, that could not get clean and sober by abstinence. So I think that, and that's one of the things that I really appreciated about Dr. K, is the fact that, he's really kind of was in, back in the 1990s, I heard you say that, but I was too. And I understand that very clearly. So yeah, I just wanted to just kind of put that out there and just hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. Well, it's an interesting question about social strata because I had the privilege for 7 years to work at a low income safety net setting part time at Highland Hospital in Oakland. It's like the sort of Bellevue of Oakland, California, and we worked with chronic pain and opiate addicted patients, and then I also work in more of an upper middle class setting in my private practice, and I teach at the medical school. So what I find is that lower income and higher income patients, they actually are quite similar, and you don't have to have two sets of rules, for dealing with the whole spectrum. Poor people, have poor people problems, which is, housing, and are they getting their social security checks, or our transportation. But yet they can be extremely responsive to treatment and respond beautifully to care. And I was lucky because I was able to use my own practice model at the county hospital. And that was the only way I agreed to work there. And we had a fulfilling time. And privileged people have their own set of problems in that they sometimes need, more boundaries and persuasion and guidance in their own way. And you end up spending as much energy with them on that sort of thing as you do helping the lower income people kind of get through the day, but they respond to buprenorphine, they respond to recovery ideas in extremely similar ways.
And I have found the level of gratitude has been skewed a little more towards those who have less.
Yes.
It's the people just throwing themselves at my feet with praise and the hugs from the parents, where nobody would talk to them, no one would give them a time. The one big difference is, of course, the more the means, the more the options. You have different facilities with different qualities and assets available to those who have the luxury of being able to choose. Folks with less have just that, less options, but can be nonetheless successful. It has been, in my very short experience, the determining factor is the level of commitment from the individual. If I am committed and I want to make this work, I can be in a place with no frills, or I can be in a place where my toes are getting mani-pedis every day. If I don't want it, it's not going to work. The same thing with the buprenorphine, the medication-assisted treatment program, how critical it is. Or let me ask you, doctor, your philosophy, and then we have just a few minutes left. The necessity for counseling throughout the process of the medicated assisted treatment program.
Sure. Well, I always think of recovery as a three-legged stool. There's the medical and biological, there's the psychological and emotional and social, and then there's that other component, which could be 12-step spirituality fellowship. It could be Buddhist, meditation. It could be peer counseling of various kinds. And I see all three as essential. Now, that being said, the evidence is that buprenorphine will actually save lives, even without these other components. I don't recommend it, but to save a life, I would give the buprenorphine and then arrange the counseling, not withhold the buprenorphine. But if we could get all three legs of the stool, biological, psychological, spiritual, together, we're much more likely to have a sustained recovery.
And on that note, I could say that we certainly are kindred spirits. Patti, thank you very much for finding Dr. K. It's quite the God wink Quite the.
He's really an amazing person, and I'm just really blessed to have him, in my corner as a professional.
Oh, really?
But I also just wanted to quickly, ask Dr. Kornfeld if he could talk about. I know he's got to go, and we've got to go here, but to talk about the Recovery Without Walls, the program that you offer in Mill Valley.
Sure, thank you. Well, a number of years ago, many of the residential alcohol and drug facilities actually were not comfortable with buprenorphine, and we were using quite a bit of buprenorphine. So we realized that we needed to start our own model, and it was a bit early in this sort of home detox and sober companion movement. And so we formulated that and called it Recovery Without Walls. I think it's become more common now that those models are being used. And there's also a role definitely for residential care. And so we combine the two, whether there's walls or not walls. Recovery is important, but also the Recovery Without Walls also means let's not have ideological walls, in our thinking, that it has to be this way, because there's many paths up the mountain of recovery.
There are multiple pathways to recovery, we like to say.
Yeah.
Being a recovery coach myself, I actually went ahead and I got the recovery coaching for the ER certification because of my experience working years in the emergency department. Doctor, thank you very much. How can people find more information about the program, Recovery Without Walls?
Yeah, well, we do have a website, which is recoverywithoutwalls.com, based in Mill Valley, California. And all the information would be there. And we'd be happy to answer questions. If we can't take a patient, we often give referrals to, geographic or appropriate settings based on insurance. And we ourselves are not on insurance plans, but we do our best to help everyone who calls us.
Wonderful. I truly appreciate that. Patti, give us a little elevator speech about your organization, what you do, and how people can reach you.
So Patti Pike is Patricia Pike, and my website is CanAm, CANAM, interventions.com. And I'm an interventionist, also an addiction recovery specialist. And so I work both in Canada and the United States.
And you're involved with AIS.
I am an AIS member, an NII member. I'm a CIP, which is a Certified Intervention Professional. And I also facilitate a lot of trainings in both Canada and the United States for folks that want to get in the field of interventions.
And all that spaghetti salad meant she knows her stuff. Well, Howard, thank you very much. I truly appreciate your time. And like I said, my sister's down in LA. Maybe I'll give you a jingle, see if we can't share a cup of coffee. Patricia, thank you very much. I'm glad to say so far so good.
Thank you.
Really, again, on behalf of everyone from Addiction Got a Minute, I'm Howie Marlin, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Howie.
If we all drip one drop of sanity back into the bucket of our society, we just might end up filling the pool enough to give the next generation a little safer world. I've got a saying that describes my efforts. The best I can do is the best I can do. And I will. This brings us to the end of another edition of Addiction Got a Minute? I wish you warm breezes and clear sailing.